Embattled Senator Al Franken due to address the media tomorrow over a growing list of women accusing him of inappropriate sexual behavior. Hello and welcome to Justice. I'm Jeanine Pirro. Thanks for being with us tonight. Hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving. Dr. Sebastian Gorka among those with me tonight to talk about the scandals enveloping Washington. But first, my opening statement. You know, Washington is a swamp in more ways than one. The predators aren't just political. They're sleazy, sexual perverts who claim the moral high ground based not on truth and justice, but on rank politics. And the craziest part is whenever there is a finding against one of these perverts, you pay the damages. And this must end. I have a few solutions. Number one, if an employee of a congressman or senator makes a sexual claim and wins, which requires you, the taxpayers, pay the settlement, we must get the money back. Since when have taxpayers been responsible for the sexual perversions of people we send to Congress to represent us? So how do we get the money back? We take it out of their pay. We sue them, or we take it out of their pension. No hard-working, tax-paying American should ever have to pay for the sexual immorality of these deviants. Number two, if an elected official seeks to hide a settlement for sexual harassment by putting it in his operating budget and thus secretly paying the victim, not only should reimbursement be made to us, but a criminal investigation should be opened. Covering up payment to a complainant by saying the woman is working when she is not is a no-show job, conspiracy, and a fraud for which state legislators have gone to jail. Number three, no more confidentiality. Complainants are forced to work in this same office where they allege the harassment or the hostile work environment occurred, and they're forced into counseling for 30 days and then mediation for another 30 days, as if they're at fault for being a victim. While the lawmakers, well, they're not required to go to anything. Every one of these cases needs to see the light of day. And if we as a society demand that complaints against priests be exposed and filed through our criminal justice system, these representatives should at the very least be held to the same standard. And number four, where there's been a finding of a hostile work environment or sexual harassment against an elected official, he or she must resign. Now, I've been telling you, in the D.C. swamp, it doesn't matter to what party you belong. These establishment politicians have had dirt on each other for years, and so they are held hostage to each other. They cannot risk taking a stand for us. That's why they'll say one thing to us and in the quiet of the night pass a budget that is totally inconsistent with what they promised us. The old boy network at work. One hand washes the other. You don't tell on me, and I won't tell on you. Think of it. 264 payouts, $17.2 million. The fund is virtually unlimited. And that doesn't include no-show payments by congressmen who don't want any record, who cover up their wrongdoing in their own operating budget. It all started in 1995. The Congressional Accountability Act of the 104th Congress. What I want to know is who decided that sexual wrongdoing by these fools is not their responsibility, but instead the taxpayers? Who decided we would pay for their sexual perversions? Who decides or sits in judgment on these claims? Why is this stuff confidential? Why don't we know who these findings are against? And shame. Shame on the women in Congress who've sat quietly for the last 20 years, knowing that there was a fund used to cover up sexual perversions, which makes the next federal female employee walking into that office vulnerable. And while these hypocrites trumpet the buckets of money that they put out to fight violence against women, they commit the very acts themselves, and they laugh at us at the same time. And as part of their charade, they voluntarily seek, as in the case of Senator Al Franken, an ethics or a House committee to review their actions. Well, that's a bunch of hogwash. The fix is in, folks. The last time a senator was kicked out of the Senate was during the Civil War. They think we're stupid. And maybe we are. And isn't it interesting that Al Franken demands that Roy Moore, accused of acts 40 years ago, and by the way, I've been real clear on how I feel about Moore. Franken says that Roy Moore has to go, while Big Al Franken has not even denied the sexual harassment allegations against him that occurred while he was a sitting United States senator. Where are our leaders? Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, for all your talk and moral piety, each of you must immediately demand the release and unmasking of those against whom sexual harassment findings have been made. Otherwise, you get out too. Enough of this mess. And these guys have the gall to trash the president when they're the ones with actual findings against them, both Senator Franken and Congressman Conyers, and payouts to victims who've had to go through hell to even file a complaint. This isn't about politics anymore, and I don't care if you're a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, a conservative, or a Martian. If we don't follow a moral code in the halls of Congress, we are doomed as a nation. No one is above the law, and certainly not these bozos. It is time we, the people, demand the justice and the accountability that these fools have been preaching to us for years. And that's my open. Tell me what you think on my Facebook page, Twitter, and Instagram, hashtag Judge Jeanine. And joining me now is Fox News national security strategist and former deputy assistant to the president. He's also author of Defeating Jihad, Dr. Sebastian Gorka. All right, Dr. Gorka, you know, a lot going on this past week, and a lot of claims that, you know, Roy Moore should go out, he should step down, he should be impeached if he gets elected as soon as he gets there. And now we find out that we've got pictures of Al Franken with his hands on the breast of a woman who was asleep, albeit on top of her Kevlar vest. And now 3 more have come out making complaints against him. He hasn't denied. All he has done is apologize. What should happen to United States Senator Al Franken?
I think it's not just about Al Franken. It's about all those payouts. I mean, think about the figures you just mentioned. More than 260 cases that were paid off with hush money. If it were 1 or 2 cases, that would be bad enough. Al Franken would be bad enough. But almost 300? This is absolutely endemic. And we have to ask the question, it's not just about the leadership. You mentioned the leadership of the Congress. I'm interested in anybody who was quiet here. Why is it that the women felt unable to talk out? What was it that stopped them? We have to have a situation in which women who are victimized in this way feel safe to talk about it, who aren't given hush money and told to be quiet.
But you know what? I have to tell you, Dr. Gorka, how can you feel safe when the rules of Congress are that the victim remain in the office where she says she's been sexually harassed? And I want to read this about Congressman Conyers, the longest-serving member of the House of Representatives, the ranking Democrat in the House Judiciary. The woman said that she was dismissed because she wouldn't succumb to sexual advancement. 4 signed affidavits from former staff members corroborating it. And I got to tell you, these women have to remain in the office for 30 days. They have to sit there. They have to go into counseling. They then have to go into mediation. I mean, how do you mediate? I've been a victim. You know, what can I do to not be a victim? And then they have to go. The Congress passed this law.
I think it's the whole ethics procedure in Congress is bankrupt. It's functionally bankrupt, and it's morally bankrupt, and it's also trying to bankrupt us by the millions they're spending. I think we have to have a full-up review. An exterior body has to come up and has to be mandated to stop the lying, to stop the hiding of the facts. The idea that you have to stay in your position after you've been assaulted or somebody has done
outrageous.
something, it is totally outrageous.
Okay.
And they're surprised that they're the least popular institution in America.
Well, good reason.
Why?
But I want to ask you something, Dr. Gorka. You know, over 300 killed in Egypt at a mosque where they were praying or engaging in religious services. Now, Egypt is, you know, more than 80 or 90% Muslim, and yet now we've got Muslims killing Muslims. What can you tell us? What is the significance of this attack?
Well, this isn't new. So in the Sinai region, Egypt has been on the front line of the war against the jihadis for years now. There's a group called Bait el-Maqdisi, which is the actual ISIS affiliate for the Sinai, for that part of Egypt, and they're trying to take down the government of President Sisi. So, you know, we have Christians suffering, we have Yazidis suffering, but also Muslims who disagree with ISIS are on the front line, and that's why we have to support Egypt, we have to support Jordan, because they are part of the solution.
All right. I have long believed that we need to support Egypt. I'm a big supporter of that country. Dr. Sebastian Gorka, thanks so much for being with us this evening. And joining me now, Rasmussen Report's political analyst, Amy Holmes. Amy, thanks for being here. All right. Were you aware of this secret mechanism by which congressmen and senators were able to resolve sexual harassment claims, pay them out at our expense, and just keep on moving while they pay, you know, just words for the rest of us and criticize people in the opposing party?
Judge Jeanine, I worked for the United States Senate, for the Senate Majority Leader, Bill Frist, you know, a decade ago. And I will tell you, I had no idea about this. This is not well known on Capitol Hill among staffers or congressmen. This is absolutely stunning. I think it is a scandal. And this is taxpayer funded. As taxpayers, we have a right to total transparency. Those are our dollars that are being paid as hush money to on behalf of sexual harassers. It's like a protection racket.
What it is, that's a good term. But what is amazing to me is that they set up the system so that they could continue legislating and continue their actions. And until we know exactly who's involved, you know, we don't know, you know, who's doing this. So how do we unmask these people? How do we know what senators and congressmen and senior leaders have been found responsible?
Well, I love all of the ideas that you had in your opening monologue. I think that they're terrific, and I think that they do need to be unmasked. And remember, it's not just unmasking the senators, but what they are allowing and tolerating among their staff members, and that a young woman or man would have to stay in their job while they're, you know, getting counseling as if they're at fault instead of the person who harassed them. This is completely perverse, and it certainly needs to change.
When you worked there, was there any whispering in the halls about certain senators or congressmen to stay away from, to not get into an elevator with?
Well, I'm smiling because
I know
certainly there were senators that you knew, you know, could be a little handsy or, you know, kind of interact with you in a way that, or at least in my case, like that made you feel a little uncomfortable, and to know to be on your guard. And I would like to hasten to add, not my boss. Bill Frist was a totally upstanding, wonderful person to work for. But certainly, as a young woman on Capitol Hill, you needed to be aware.
Well, the interesting thing, Amy, about Capitol Hill is when you walk through those halls, they are all young people, young men, young women. And then you've got on the other side the legislators. I mean, they're all mature, older men mostly, and of course women. And I am very disappointed in the women Congress, women or women senators who may have known about this. Certainly the 104th Congress knew about this.
Yeah, it is disappointing. And, you know, again, getting back to the whispering. So right now you're hearing this talking point about how Democrats don't need to hold Al Franken accountable because Republicans don't. So why would we unilaterally disarm? Judge Jeanine, that is not only silly and immoral, it's also false. Do you remember Bob Livingston? He was the incoming Speaker of the House for, about a minute until a scandal, and he he resigned. Mark Foley, a congressman from Florida, he resigned.
But listen to what Representative James Clyburn, a Democrat, member of Democratic leadership, said. He's not sure that the claims against Congressman Conyers that have any substance. You can't jump to conclusions with these types of things. For all I know, this could be made up. So you've got a Democratic congressman saying in a case against Congressman Conyers, where there's been a finding, there's been a finding against Conyers. He says, you don't know if this stuff was made up. And yet, when they criticize the president in terms of Roy Moore, there's been no finding against Roy Moore. And I'm not apologizing for him. Believe me, I made it real clear how I feel about him. And yet, how do they stand up and say, well, even though there's a finding, it's still not necessary. You still shouldn't believe the women if it's a Democrat, but believe the women if it's a Republican who's a target.
How do they indeed? And how do they defend that apparently Congressman Conyers, he also would wander around his office in his underwear? A woman came to his office and there he was. I mean, how do you explain that away? How do you defend that? You don't.
Allegations,
and as you say, that there were findings. Now, I'd also like to point out in the case of Senator Franken that if he were a no-name Joe cruising Minnesota state fairs, grabbing women, he would be liable to arrest, certainly. And at the very least, his picture would be at the front of the fair with a do not admit sign. I mean, the average person in New York City doesn't get to go around groping women and they say, oh, it was a joke.
And you know what?
Absurd.
The amazing thing is these people pass the laws and then make laws so that they don't have to be accountable.
Well, we saw this with Bill Clinton, you remember. He passed sexual violence, sexual harassment law that he himself was violating.
Amy Holmes, always good to talk with you.
Thank you, Judge.
And Dan Bongino and Chris Hahn are going to do battle on the panel later. And next, the Little Sisters of the Poor head back to court to fight for their religious rights. You're not going to believe this. Then I'll saddle up and take you for an exclusive look at the southern border. Justice trots on in a moment. Welcome back to Justice. You may remember last month the government issued a rule protecting religious nonprofits like the Little Sisters of the Poor from providing abortion services in their health care plans. It was a win for anyone who believes in religious freedom. But already states like California and Pennsylvania are suing to reverse that exemption. I'm joined now by Mark Rienzi, who is the lead attorney for Little Sisters of the Poor. All right, Mark, thanks for being with us tonight. But, you know, Mark, I have to tell you, I was kind of surprised when I saw this lawsuit by California and by Pennsylvania against the Little Sisters of the Poor. For some reason, I thought the Supreme Court of the United States in 2014 and 2016 made a decision in the Hobby Lobby case, thanks to Steve Green, that you can't force people to violate their religious freedoms and to provide contraceptives to employees. And the Supreme Court said you can't penalize Little Sisters of the Poor. And now the Supreme Court having spoken, these states come out and they're gunning for the Little Sisters of the Poor. What's this about?
Well, you're exactly right, Judge, and I tell you, the Little Sisters were surprised too. What this is about really is Javier Becerra in California and Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania trying to revive the last administration's unnecessary culture war. Everybody knows you don't need nuns to give out contraceptives. The federal government finally admitted that they couldn't and shouldn't do that, and they had lots of other ways. And these states are now just trying to pick up the old culture war, and I don't know who they think they're pleasing by attacking nuns, but it's not going to work.
Well, and who's paying for all this? You know, the Little Sisters of the Poor, just remind my viewing audience, you know, who they are and what they do.
Sure. The Little Sisters of the Poor are Catholic nuns who take care of the elderly, poor, and dying.
Right.
And they take care of people who have no place else to go. And you asked who's paying for it. It's the taxpayers of Pennsylvania and California, unfortunately, who are paying for these lawsuits. I seriously doubt that they want their elected officials to go suing nuns who take care of the elderly, poor, and dying for free. But that's who's paying for it. And it's hard to believe that any of the voters actually want their governments to do this kind of thing.
And then, but who represents the Little Sisters of the Poor? You do.
I do. I get to represent the Little Sisters of the Poor, which is a wonderful thing to do. And what we're doing is we're going into court and we're telling those judges, The Supreme Court has already decided this, and you can't take away the Little Sisters of the Poor's rights. And of course, there are just lots of ways for people to get contraceptives without nuns. And these states know that. This is just political grandstanding.
Right. So that those individuals who may be working for religious institutions, they have other options, other ways to get contraception without forcing the Little Sisters of the Poor to expend their energy, their time on a case that's res judicata. It's already been decided, where there's already a precedent by the highest court in the land. Is this just mean-spirited states like California, a sanctuary state, Pennsylvania, not yet a sanctuary state, but some of the biggest cities are resisting, sanctuary cities, Philadelphia, etc. I mean, they just don't believe in accepting the law as it's written.
I think that's right. They could have filed motions to intervene in the Supreme Court case, or they could go back to the Supreme Court if they want. But they don't have the guts to do that. They filed their new suits, and they didn't complain about secular big corporations leaving out contraceptives. They were fine with that for years. They only seem to have a problem with it when the Little Sisters of the Poor want to do it, and that just makes no sense.
You know, the sad part is, Mark, that, you have groups of individuals who are selfless and taking care of those who are poor and dying and are forced to go through the stress of all this. These are mean-spirited plaintiffs. And, in the end, I do believe there is a God. Anyway, Mark Rienzi, good luck. When do you think this will be over?
Well, the first hearings will be in December, and I actually think it might be over pretty quickly because these aren't good lawsuits. These are grandstanding lawsuits, and they're going to lose.
All right, Mark Rienzi, thanks so much.
Thank you, Judge.
And first daughter Ivanka Trump heads to India tomorrow. She's going to lead the U.S. contingent at the 8th Annual Global Entrepreneurs HIP Summit. Entrepreneurs HIP, as you know, is a key priority for the Trump administration. The theme of this year's summit is Women First, Prosperity for All, and Ivanka will be representing, among others, the more than 11 million women who own businesses here in the United States. It's going to be quite a week in India. And when it's over, Ivanka will join me here on Justice next Saturday night to talk about it. You don't want to miss it. And Dan Bongino and Chris Hahn, my political action fighters, on deck. This is going to be fun. Don't go away.
Live from America's news headquarters, I'm Patty Ann Brown. The Navy has identified the 3 service members killed in Wednesday's plane crash in the Philippine Sea. Lieutenant Stephen Combs and Airman Apprentice Brian Grasso of Florida and Airman Matthew Chialostri of Louisiana were lost at sea. Their C-2A Greyhound plane crashed on its way to land on the USS Ronald Reagan aircraft carrier. 8 people were rescued, but the search for the 3 missing men was called off Friday. And a high court judge in Zimbabwe has decided the military ouster of longtime President Robert Mugabe was legal. The court ruled that the military's actions were lawful, constitutional, and not a coup. Many of the former president's allies have criticized the judge's decision. Mugabe resigned his presidency after spending days under house arrest. I'm Patty Ann Brown. Now back to Justice with Judge Jeanine.
Senator Al Franken due to address the media tomorrow about the sex harassment allegations against him as new details come to light about just how much American taxpayers are shilling out to defend lawmakers charged with harassment. Rebecca Rose Woodland is an attorney, and she joins me now. All right, good evening, Rebecca. I find interesting that all the talk of Roy Moore and the Democrats saying he shouldn't run, and if he does get elected to the United States Senate, that we should automatically get rid of him. And yet now that Al Franken has been accused as senator and Representative Conyers, we know there's been a finding against him, the Democrats are now saying, well, maybe not so fast. What is going on here?
I think it's hypocrisy, and I think we have to be nonpartisan about this issue, Janine. Jeanine. This is an issue that's facing women and men across the country. Clearly, it is not only in Congress. There are other areas that it's very broad, and we need to find an answer, and we need to address every single sexual harassment allegation, no matter a Democrat or a Republican.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't think there's anyone who would disagree with that. I mean, it's about truth, justice, and the administration of law, the enforcement of laws. But the question is, the hypocrisy in Washington is so deep that when there's an allegation against someone in the Republican Party, even if it's 40 years ago, that man must go and these women must be believed. And when there is a finding against a Democrat, well, not so fast. Even though there was a settlement paid out, this guy really is a good guy. And, you know, we've got this Senator Marie Hirono from Hawaii, who says that it's a simple distraction to call for Al Franken's resignation following allegations that he groped, I think, as many as 4 or 5 women at this point without their consent. Should all of these people be, you know, not just accountable, but shouldn't there be some kind of reckoning with them for protecting those in their own party?
Look, I totally agree with you that everyone should have to go through the ethics panel. Let every single allegation be investigated.
But look, you know that no one who's gone through the ethics panel since the Civil War has been outed. I mean, it's a joke. It's the one hand washes the other. It's please let the ethics panel investigate me. That's just their way of saying the boys will take care of me in the back room.
But now we have both sides facing the same issue. So why don't we figure out maybe another way, which is what you and I talked about the other night on Sean Hannity's show. Is there a way to rejuvenate the ethics panel to make it more ethical? How about that?
How about we not have an ethics panel?
Okay.
How about these guys be made accountable like every other American who's sitting watching this show right now, which is, if a woman accuses you of sexual assault, you call the police, you go to the DA, and you deal with it the way everyone else deals with it. No more protection racket, no more covering up, no more me paying for you. Because this, sooner or later, Rebecca, they're going to end up covering for each other again.
Okay, then you know what? I like this idea. How about we expand the EEOC? Now, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is for regular civilians who investigates the sexual harassment allegations. You can go either to a state or to a federal agency, which is the EEOC. Maybe we should expand the EEOC to cover also crimes of congressmen. That might be a great plan because they are well equipped, clearly, to do this on a regular basis. And now we're seeing so many of these.
Well, you know what?
This is not like 1 or 2.
It's like Hollywood, Washington. You know, the amazing part, Donald Trump comes into the White House. Everyone is marching and accusing him of X, Y, and Z. And it's like when you point the finger at someone, how many fingers are pointing back at you? Well, isn't the irony just amazing as to what's going on?
It is quite ironic now. I mean, but I really think we have to look at this as a huge issue that is facing women and a great opportunity to move forward.
I think we ought to get rid of all of them. Sexual harassment, that's it. You're out. Rebecca Rose Woodland, thanks so much for being with us. And horseback riding at the southern border still ahead. But next, my political panel. Don't go away. Welcome back to Justice. It's time for my political panel. Dan Bongino, a former Secret Service agent, former NYPD officer, and Chris Hahn, a radio talk show host, former aide to Senator Schumer. Now, we're having technical difficulties right now with his signal. Chris may be joining us in a few, but we just as well start with Dan. Dan, thanks for being here. You know, Dan, what is going on in this country is a reckoning, not just in terms of the power differential between men and women and the ability of men to impose themselves on women who are seeking jobs, whether it's in Washington or whether it's in Hollywood. But what we're also seeing is a hypocrisy, not just in terms of one party criticizing the other party, but the rules are different, and they have been covering up the fact that there are findings against legislators in Washington, and we're paying for the verdicts. What do you think of all this?
Well, on that second point, this slush fund, this sexual harassment slush fund is an international, forget that, it's an intergalactic disgrace. I mean, this is, can you imagine, Judge, if this was a private company, right? A private company that had a little honeypot of money to pay off sexual harassment suits by some pigs in their company who decided to put their mitts on women, the shareholders would revolt. That's right. But here's the catch, Judge. This is taxpayer money. Yeah. Who are the darn shareholders? Us. We're paying off a bunch of pigs out there groping women, our mothers, our daughters, and our sisters with taxpayer money? No. This is a total disaster. Every one of them needs to be exposed. Every dollar needs to be accounted for, and every dollar needs to be paid back to the taxpayers.
Well, yeah. In my opening statement, I said, you know what? We either sue them, take it out of their pay, or take it out of their pension. I mean, the concept of making someone else pay for your sexual shenanigans is just absurd. But I have to tell you, Dan, even more than that, we have no way of knowing now whether or not any of these bad actors, I'll call them, have been found responsible on more than one occasion. So, with Conyers having one of the complaints paid out through his operating budget instead of through this slush fund for sexual perverts, it tells me that there may have been others and he didn't want to add to it. Do you think that one of the ways to handle this is not only to make them pay, but the term limits are necessary to stop these fools from thinking that they can just do whatever they want?
Yeah, I mean, these have really become lifetime appointments. Now, I'm always up in the air a bit on term limits, which surprises some of my conservative friends. I am for them, but with this caveat here, you do have to understand that where they've done research, Heritage and other groups like that, on term limits, they found out, Judge, that it does tend to empower the bureaucracy. Because just as people get a hold of what they're doing, the elected officials, they're out, and then the bureaucrats take over. But I can't disagree with you. They think this is some kind of lifetime appointment, like a sinecure here. And I think it changes maybe the brain chemistry. I don't know. I mean, I've gone up to Capitol Hill, and I can tell you there are very few good guys and women left up there.
But you know what, Dan? I really believe that there is a balance between the idea of keeping people who are experienced and getting, and not having people think that this is a lifetime job. But listen, my producers are telling me in my ear that we're not going to be getting Chris Hahn. So I'm going to do what Chris Hahn said, would probably say. And that is that, when you're accused of doing something against children, that's even more perverse than a settlement that's made for legal reasons, like Roy Moore versus Conyers. Talk to me.
Well, I love my ideological sparring sessions with Chris, so you'll be fake Chris for now, Judge. Listen, he's right. This is if these accusations are in fact true, let's just you're a judge, you're a lawyer. Let's point stipulate it. I'm not a judge. I stipulate that point. This is awful. Let's not, as a father of daughter, I have daughters. It doesn't matter. As a human being, forget the other stuff. It's disgusting if in fact true. My problem, Judge, is what's the darn standard here? The standard for Democrats seems to be this. Accusations are made, media defends, apologies made. Everybody wipe your hands. All good, fellas. Move along. Nothing to see here. The standard for Republicans is accusations made, media pounces, blood drips from the fangs. The rear naked show comes on, the guy taps out, he resigns from the race, never to be heard from again. And a little hat tip to Ben Shapiro. He wrote a piece about this, and he said, what do you wind up with then, Judge? You wind up with a bunch of sexual perverts who are Democrats because they never resign, and the Republicans resign immediately because the media said so.
We need a set of standards. For me.